I was nothing to him, not his daughter, not his blood, not the child he once cradled in his arms. I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a disposable, unwanted burden. I realized it the moment I walked through that door, my backpack slipping off my shoulder as my eyes landed on the suitcases stacked neatly by the entrance. My suitcases. I felt my breath hitch, my heart pounding violently against my ribs as I stared at the evidence of my own erasure. My room, my sanctuary, had been stripped away. In its place, pastel walls, stuffed animals, and a rocking chair sat in eerie stillness, a nursery. A cold, suffocating weight settled over me, making it hard to breathe. My hands trembled as I took a shaky step forward. What is this? Candy, my father's wife, stood beside him, her pregnant belly impossibly large, her fingers digging possessively into his arm. A smug, satisfied gleam flickered in her eyes. "We need your room, Robin," Dad said, his voice disturbingly casual, like he wasn't tearing my world apart, like he wasn't gutting me alive with his indifference. "Candy's due any day now. It's time for you to go." Go, like I was a guest who had overstayed my welcome, like I wasn't his daughter, like I didn't belong. I swallowed hard, my throat raw with unshed tears. You're kicking me out?" Candy let out a dramatic sigh, rubbing her belly as if the weight of pregnancy somehow justified ruining my life. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, sweetheart. You're nearly an adult. You'll be fine." Fine? How could I be fine? This was my home, the house my mother left me, the walls that once echoed with her laughter, now being painted over to erase any trace of her. I turned to my father, desperate, pleading, "Dad!" But his face was blank, empty. There was no regret, no hesitation, just a quiet, cruel finality, and just like that I knew I was nothing to him. My hands shook as I grabbed my bags. I forced myself to hold my head high, to not let them see me break. I refused to give Candy the satisfaction. The night air was brutal against my tear-streaked cheeks as I stepped outside, my body trembling from more than just the cold. I stood there for a long moment, staring up at the darkening sky, swallowing back sobs that threatened to choke me. I had nowhere to go. Nowhere, except for Aunt Lisa's. A flicker of hope. She opened the door, took one look at me, and pulled me into her arms without a word. I shattered in her embrace, my body racked with silent, heaving sobs. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tight with barely contained rage. I barely managed to whisper, "They kicked me out!" Her grip tightened around me, her body shaking with fury. "That woman!" she spat, her voice venomous. "I knew she was trouble the second your father brought her into your lives, but this is unforgivable." I curled up on her couch that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling hollow, feeling nothing. Aunt Lisa stroked my hair like she used to when I was little, whispering words of comfort that I barely heard. "We'll fight this," she murmured. "This isn't over." But how could we fight when my own father had already decided I wasn't worth fighting for? I lay awake long after the house fell silent, my mind racing with everything I had lost. My mother's presence still lingered in that house, in the pictures that used to hang on the walls, in the furniture she had picked out with love, but Candy was trying to erase all of it, trying to erase her, trying to erase me. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my skin. No, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. A week later, I sat in a lawyer's office, staring at papers filled with legal jargon I barely understood. Aunt Lisa sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "The house is yours, Robin," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "Your mother left everything to you. You'll have full control on your 18th birthday." My mind raced. The house, my house, and they were living in it like they owned the place. Candy and my father had treated me like an unwanted burden, but in just a few months, I would have the power to turn their lives upside down. "Can I kick them out?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes, and you should," the lawyer nodded. "Legally, they're occupying your property without ownership rights. Once you turn 18, you can evict them." Something inside me snapped into place. They thought they'd won, that they could erase me from my own home, but they had no idea what was coming. Over the next few months, I watched them from the sidelines, biding my time. Candy was getting more and more controlling, her influence over my father suffocating. She'd convinced him that I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a loose end in their perfect little life, but I wasn't going to stay silent forever. Then I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Candy had planned everything, the pregnancy, the manipulation, even getting rid of me. She wanted my father's full attention, and I was in the way. Aunt Lisa and I dug deeper. Candy had stopped working long before she got pregnant. She had pushed my father to quit his job under the guise of starting fresh, knowing full well they had no financial stability of their own. She had been setting up her position for years, sinking her claws into my father until he was completely dependent on her. And me, I was the last obstacle. The realization hit me like a freight train. She was terrified that my father loved me more than he'd love her baby. And she had made sure I was removed from the picture before that baby was even born. She had manipulated every move he made, feeding into his ego, making him believe that his life would be easier without me. And now, she was tightening her grip, ensuring that their child would be the sole focus of his world. I clenched my fists. She had stolen my home, my family, and now she was living in the house my mother built. But soon, I'd take it all back. And this time, I wouldn't be the one packing my bags. I started preparing. I worked every shift I could at Joe's coffee shop, saving every penny. I refused to ask Dad for a dime. I refused to give Candy the satisfaction of knowing I needed them. I pretended to be invisible when I saw them in town, and when Dad texted me once, only once, I left him on read. Candy continued her charade, painting herself as the perfect wife, the perfect mother-to-be, but I could see the cracks. The desperation in her eyes when Dad looked at me for even a second too long, the way she tensed whenever my name was mentioned. She was scared. Good, because she should be. The days blurred into weeks, and I watched from the sidelines as Candy tightened her grip on my father. It was almost amusing, in a twisted way. She paraded around town, playing the role of the perfect housewife, the glowing soon-to-be mother. But I saw through the facade. She was restless, desperate to make sure nothing could jeopardize her position. And that meant keeping my father entirely under her control. I stayed out of sight as much as possible, working at Joe's coffee shop, saving money, biding my time. But that didn't mean I stopped paying attention. The more I observed, the more I realized just how carefully she had orchestrated this entire situation. She wasn't just a manipulator, she was a strategist. She had ensured my father quit his job before the pregnancy, making him reliant on her, while at the same time whispering in his ear about how much easier life would be without me. She made sure to plant the seed early, and by the time she was visibly pregnant, he was already convinced that pushing me out was the only logical solution. But even with her careful planning, she had one major flaw. She underestimated me. One evening, I lingered in the coffee shop after my shift, scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. A social media update from one of my dad's old co-workers. I clicked on it, curiosity getting the best of me, and immediately felt my stomach drop. It was a post about a company reunion, a comment section filled with old colleagues reminiscing, and buried in the thread, a message from my father's former boss. Still can't believe John torched his career over some mistress. Guess he got what he wanted, hope it was worth it. I stared at the words, my blood turning to ice. So that was it. My father never left his job voluntarily. He was forced out. Candy had made sure he had nowhere else to turn. She had cut him off from his career, isolated him from his colleagues, and pushed him into her world, where she could control every aspect of his life. And yet, despite all that effort, despite all the manipulation, I could tell she was still terrified. Terrified that even after all of this, my father might still love me more than he loved her. And she was right to be afraid. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Candy wasn't satisfied with just having Dad's attention. She needed absolute devotion. She needed him to put her and the baby above everything, above everyone. And for that to happen, she needed to make sure I was permanently out of the picture. She had succeeded once, but she wasn't stupid. She knew I was still a loose thread. And so, she hatched a new plan. I noticed it when I came home from work one evening. My father's car was parked outside, which was unusual since he was rarely home anymore. I hesitated at the door, my stomach twisting. Something felt off. When I stepped inside, the air was thick with tension. Candy was in the living room, sitting on the couch, her hand resting on her stomach. My father stood nearby, arms crossed, his face carefully blank. "Robin," Candy greeted me sweetly. Too sweetly. My stomach dropped. "Come sit, we need to talk." I didn't move. "What's this about?" My father sighed, running a hand down his face. "Candy thinks we need to set some boundaries. Things have been strained between all of us." Strained? That was one way to put it. Candy nodded, putting on her best sympathetic expression. "I just think, for the sake of the baby, we need a peaceful environment. Stress isn't good for me, and it's not good for the baby either." I felt my jaw clench. "And what does that mean exactly?" Candy's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "We think it would be best if you stopped visiting altogether." My breath caught. "Excuse me?" Dad shifted uncomfortably but didn't contradict her. Candy reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You're almost an adult, Robin. You have your job, your own life. You don't need to be around all this tension. I could see what she was doing. She wanted me gone completely. The eviction wasn't enough. She wanted to cut me out of my father's life for good. I looked at Dad, searching for any sign that he disagreed, that he saw what she was doing, but there was nothing. He wasn't even looking at me. I felt my chest tighten, the betrayal hitting me harder than I expected. Candy had won again, or at least she thought she had. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Fine, I said. You want me out? I'm out. Candy's smile widened. She thought she had just secured her victory, but what she didn't realize was that in just a few short months, I would be the one calling the shots, and when that day came, she would be the one packing her bags. The days dragged by, each one bringing me closer to my 18th birthday, closer to the moment when I could finally take back what was mine. But every day that passed also gave Candy more time to tighten her grip on my father. I stopped visiting, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. Every time I stepped foot in that house, I could feel Candy's smug satisfaction growing. She thought she had won, thought I was nothing but a temporary inconvenience that had finally faded away. I let her believe it. Aunt Lisa and I kept our plans quiet. There were meetings with the lawyer, documents being prepared, plans being made. I was counting down the days, and Candy had no idea. But then something unexpected happened. One evening, while I was closing up at Joe's coffee shop, my father walked in. It was the first time he'd sought me out since kicking me out. I froze, gripping the rag in my hand as I watched him shuffle toward the counter. He looked tired. Robin, he said, clearing his throat awkwardly. Can we talk? I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral. About what? He hesitated. About everything. I knew better than to trust him, but curiosity got the better of me. With a nod, I gestured for him to sit at one of the tables. I followed, crossing my arms as I sat across from him. He looked down at his hands. Candy thinks I shouldn't be here. I let out a short laugh. Of course she does. His lips pressed together. She says it's best for the baby if we don't talk to each other. I raised an eyebrow. And you listened? He sighed. Robin, it's complicated. She's my wife. We're starting a family. She just wants things to be peaceful. Peaceful. I wanted to scream. Instead, I leaned forward. And what about me, Dad? What about your first family? Or did I stop mattering the moment she got pregnant? He flinched but didn't answer, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I stood up. I have nothing to say to you. His shoulders slumped. Robin, please. No! I snapped, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. You made your choice, and in a few months, I get to make mine. I walked away before he could say another word. Let him sit there. Let him wonder what I meant, because soon he'd find out. 2 months before my 18th birthday, I got a call from Aunt Lisa. Robin, I think you need to come over. Her voice was tense, and my stomach twisted in response. What happened? She hesitated. I got a call from someone in Candy's old workplace. You need to hear this. I was at her house in 10 minutes, heart pounding. When I arrived, she had her laptop open, a video paused on the screen. Sit, she said, and watch. I sat, hit play. The video was grainy security footage, but it was clear enough. It showed Candy standing behind a register at a store. She was arguing with someone, a customer it seemed. But then, suddenly she lunged at them, knocking over a display in the process. A moment later, security appeared, pulling her away. I stared at the screen. What am I looking at? Lisa leaned forward. This is why she lost her job. She attacked a customer. Apparently, she claimed the woman was flirting with John. I blinked. My father? Lisa nodded grimly. It gets worse. She had a history of this, multiple incidents. This wasn't a one-time thing. She's obsessive, Robin. She doesn't just want your father's love. She needs it. She needs to be the center of his world, no matter the cost. My mind reeled. It made sense. Too much sense. She had been planning this for years. She had isolated my father, controlled his choices, pushed me out, because she couldn't stand the idea of him loving anyone more than her, and she was getting worse. Lisa exhaled. Robin, I don't think she's just manipulative. I think she's dangerous. I gritted my teeth. Then it's time we start fighting back. Because if Candy thought she could get rid of me so easily, she had another thing coming. The days leading up to my 18th birthday felt like the calm before a storm. Candy thought she had won, that she had erased me from my father's life, but she had no idea that the ground beneath her was beginning to crack. She had worked for years to mold my father into a man who saw only her, who obeyed her every whim. She had isolated him, ensured he had no job, no friends, no family except for her and the baby. And yet, even after all that, she wasn't satisfied. She couldn't be satisfied, not as long as I still existed. So I started a quiet war. I didn't confront her, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry. Instead, I made sure my father knew I was still there. Every few days, I sent him messages. Nothing emotional, just simple, neutral texts. How are you, Dad? How's the baby? Are you doing okay? I knew Candy saw them, and I knew it made her blood boil. I could tell because she started fighting harder to maintain control. One night, Aunt Lisa called me, her voice urgent. Robin, something's happening! I rushed over, my heart pounding. She handed me her phone. On the screen was a long text from Dad. Lisa, I need to talk to Robin. I know I made mistakes, but I feel like I don't even know what's happening anymore. Candy's been acting different, controlling. She gets angry when I even mention Robin. I don't know what to do. I stared at the message, my pulse racing. Candy's grip was slipping. She knows she's losing control, Lisa said, and that makes her dangerous. She was right. I had been trying to wait patiently for my birthday, to take back my house the legal way. But now I realized waiting might not be an option. Candy wasn't going to go down without a fight. Then I started noticing strange things happening. People at work were looking at me differently, some with pity, others with judgment. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I overheard 2 customers whispering at Joe's coffee shop. I heard she stole from her dad, one said. No way, the other murmured. Candy told me herself. Robin's a troublemaker, ungrateful. My hands clenched into fists. Candy was spreading lies about me. I gritted my teeth, fury burning inside me. She wanted to turn people against me, make me seem like the villain. Fine, Candy. You want to play dirty? Let's play. I started gathering proof. I took screenshots of my father's messages. I documented every instance where people had repeated lies she had spread about me. One evening, Aunt Lisa called again, but this time her voice was sharp. Robin, I need you to see something. I rushed to her house where she had her laptop open. A video was paused on the screen. She pressed play. The grainy security footage showed Candy standing behind the register at a store. She was arguing with a customer. Then, suddenly, she lunged at them, knocking over a display. A moment later, security appeared, dragging her away. My mouth went dry. What am I looking at? Lisa leaned forward. This is why she lost her last job. She attacked a customer. Apparently, she accused the woman of flirting with John. I blinked. My father? Lisa nodded grimly. It gets worse. She has a history of this. This wasn't a one-time thing. She's obsessive, Robin. She doesn't just want your father's love. She needs it. I swallowed hard. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Candy hadn't just manipulated my father. She had engineered this entire situation. She had planned her pregnancy. She had made sure he was jobless, reliant on her. She had pushed me out because she couldn't stand the idea that he might love me more than he loved her or their child. And now she was losing control. Lisa placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Robin, I don't think she's just manipulative. I think she's dangerous. I exhaled shakily. Then it's time we start fighting back. Because if Candy thought she could get rid of me so easily, she had another thing coming. A week before my 18th birthday, everything escalated. Candy wasn't just trying to push me out of my father's life, she was trying to erase me entirely. I should have seen it coming, but even I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. It started with whispers. People I barely knew started looking at me differently, as if they knew something about me that I didn't. Customers at Joe's coffee shop would stare, some with pity, others with outright judgment. Then, Megan, one of my coworkers, pulled me aside after my shift. Robin, I don't know if you know this, but Candy's been talking about you. I stiffened. What do you mean? Megan hesitated. She came in the other day, said she was just checking in on you, but she started telling our manager that you had a history of stealing, that you were unstable, that she was worried you might bring personal drama into the workplace. A cold fury settled in my gut. Candy was trying to get me fired. Megan frowned. Look, I told the manager it sounded like BS, but she's really convincing. I clenched my fists. Candy had already stolen my home, my father, my sense of security. Now she was coming after my independence. No, I wouldn't let her take this from me. That same night, Aunt Lisa called me. Robin, I think Candy's planning something bigger. I rushed to her house, heart pounding. She handed me a printed out email. She sent this to Joe's coffee shop's landlord. She's claiming that you've been involved in theft and should be removed from your job. I scanned the email, my blood boiling. It was filled with carefully crafted lies, claims that I had been stealing money from the register, that I was showing up late and being disrespectful to customers. She was trying to destroy me. Aunt Lisa placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Robin, you need to act now, before she does something that can't be undone." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Then let's end this." The next day, I decided to strike first. I sent a message to my father. "We need to talk, alone." It took hours for him to reply. Finally, late that night, a simple response came through. "Meet me at the diner on Main Street, 8 p.m. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a booth, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. He barely looked at me as I slid into the seat across from him. "Dad," I said carefully, "do you know what Candy's been doing?" His shoulders tensed. "Robin, don't start." I cut him off. "She's trying to get me fired. She's been spreading lies about me all over town." His eyes flickered with doubt, but he shook his head. "That's not true. Candy just wants to protect our family." I let out a bitter laugh. "Protect it? She's the one destroying it." I reached into my bag, pulling out a file folder Aunt Lisa had helped me prepare. "Look at this." I slid it across the table. He hesitated before opening it, his face paling as he read the printed messages, the reports, the security footage from her old job, the proof that she had a history of obsession, control, and violence. This isn't possible," he whispered. "Wake up, Dad," I snapped. "She's manipulating you, she's isolated you, and she's going to throw you away just like she threw me away the moment she gets what she wants." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "Robin, Before he could finish, his phone buzzed. I already knew who it was. His face turned pale as he read the message. He stood abruptly, his voice tight. "I have to go." "Dad, she's pregnant, Robin," he said, almost as if he was trying to convince himself more than me. "She needs me." And just like that, he walked away. That night, I got a text from a blocked number. "Stay away from my husband." I stared at the message, my blood running cold. She knew. She had eyes everywhere, and she was ready for war. I sat in my room staring at my reflection in the mirror. I had been fighting for months, but this wasn't just about me anymore. Candy was dangerous, and she was going to keep hurting people as long as she got away with it. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. It was time for the final move, and I was ready. The days leading up to my 18th birthday felt suffocating. Candy knew I had met with my father. She knew I was trying to break her control, and that meant she was about to hit back, hard. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, I walked into Joe's coffee shop for my shift and was immediately called into the back office. My manager, Mr. Patel, sat behind his desk, looking uneasy. "Robin," he said carefully, "I got an email about you. An accusation." I forced myself to stay calm. "From who?" he sighed. "A woman named Candy Thompson." "Of course. She claims you've been stealing from the register." I clenched my fists. "That's a lie." Mr. Patel held up a hand. "I know, you've been a model employee, but I need to be careful, so I checked the security footage." He turned his monitor toward me. The footage played, showing me working at the register, counting money at the end of a shift, nothing suspicious. Then a new clip played. This time it showed Candy standing near the counter while I was in the back. Her hand darted over the register, slipping something inside her purse before walking away. I exhaled slowly. She was trying to frame me. Mr. Patel shook his head. "I don't know what kind of game she's playing, but she's desperate. I just wanted to warn you." I nodded, my body tense. "Thanks, I appreciate it." Walking out of that office, I knew one thing. Candy was unraveling. She had played her games for years, but she was losing control, and she was getting reckless. That made her dangerous. That evening, I got another text from my father. "We need to talk. Come to the house." I hesitated. I hadn't stepped foot in that house since the day they kicked me out, but something told me this was it. This was the moment it all came to a head. I texted Aunt Lisa, telling her where I was going, then made my way back to what was once my home. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Candy stood in the living room, her arms crossed, her face set in a cold, triumphant smirk. My father was beside her, looking exhausted, torn between us. I squared my shoulders. "What's this about?" Candy's eyes gleamed. "John has something to tell you." I looked at my father, who exhaled heavily. "Robin, I think it's best if we put the past behind us." My stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" Candy smiled, her voice sickeningly sweet. "It means you're not welcome here anymore. Ever. We've decided it's best for the baby if you stay out of our lives." I felt something inside me snap. "This is my house!" I hissed. "My mother left it to me!" Candy's smirk widened. "Not for long." My father rubbed his temple. "Candy's just trying to keep the peace, Robin." I laughed bitterly. "Peace? She spent months trying to destroy my life." Candy let out a dramatic sigh. John, do you see how aggressive she is? She's unstable. I turned to my father, searching his face for any sign that he saw the truth, but he wouldn't even look at me. I swallowed down the lump in my throat. You're making a mistake. Candy wrapped her arms around his. No, sweetheart, you made the mistake of coming back. I inhaled sharply, nodding to myself. Okay, you want me gone? I took a step back. Then I'll go. Candy's smirk deepened, thinking she had won. She had no idea what was coming. The morning of my 18th birthday, I woke up with one thought. It's over. For months, I had waited, planned, endured. Candy had played every dirty trick she could to break me, lying, manipulating, even trying to ruin my job. But she had underestimated one thing. I was patient. And today, I was in control. Aunt Lisa and I met with the lawyer first thing in the morning. The paperwork was ready. The eviction notice was official. Candy and my father had 30 days to get out of my house. I didn't wait to deliver the news. I arrived at the house just after noon. Candy was in the kitchen, sipping tea, looking smug as ever. My father sat on the couch, staring at the TV, looking like a man who had long since given up. They barely noticed me when I walked in. Candy glanced up, rolling her eyes. Robin, what are you doing here? I thought we were done with these little visits. I set the envelope on the counter and slid it toward her. Read it. She let out a dramatic sigh and picked it up, flipping it open lazily, until her face twisted in confusion. Then anger. What is this? She snapped. I crossed my arms. An eviction notice. You and my father have 30 days to leave my house. Candy's face paled, then turned red. You can't do this. John, tell her she can't do this. I turned to my father. He still hadn't looked at me. His hands were clasped together, his body hunched forward like a broken man. He had already given up before the fight had even started. You're legally squatting on my property, I continued. If you don't leave in 30 days, I'll have the police remove you. Candy let out a shrill, humorless laugh. You expect us to just leave? With a baby? Where are we supposed to go? I shrugged. Not my problem. She threw the papers on the counter. This is our home. We made renovations. With my mother's money, I interrupted. You haven't spent a dime of your own, and I owe you nothing. Candy turned to my father in desperation. John, say something! My father finally looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in his eyes that almost resembled shame. Robin, he started. Then he sighed, rubbing his face. She's right, Candy. Candy reeled back like he had slapped her. What? It's her house. He let out a heavy breath. We'll pack. Candy let out an enraged scream, throwing the eviction notice across the room. You spineless idiot, she shrieked at my father. You're just going to let her kick us out? After everything I've done for you? I smirked. After everything you've done to me? She was shaking with rage now. You think you've won? She spat. Fine, take your stupid house, but you'll always be alone, just like your mother. My jaw clenched, but I refused to let her see me break. I turned toward the door. You have 30 days. Then I walked out, the weight of years of manipulation finally lifting from my shoulders. Candy screamed in frustration behind me, but I didn't stop. I had won.